Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
Start your day tomorrow with The Daily Dog with Michelle Forto, the morning podcast on Dog Works Radio. Apple Podcast reviewer Patty Christensen calls it funny, smart, and filled with all the info I want to know about dogs. I love this show. Wake up with The Daily Dog. Available on Dog Works Radio on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows.
Dog Works Radio Network presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to follow us on social media, searching for Dogworks Radio. And today, joining us from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, is Dan Hanks. He is one of the guys that's heading over to Sweden to run in the World Championships for the dryland races. Dan, how's it going?
It's going great, Robert. Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
I'm a big fan of the show, by the way.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And could you do us a favor and introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you're all about, please?
Sure. So, well, about a lot of things, but I'm about dog sports. So I grew up in southeast Alaska, and there's not a lot of mushers growing up in southeast Alaska because in places like Petersburg and Ketchikan, Alaska, there's not a lot of snow. And everyone thinks down in the States that all of Alaska is the same and it's snowy and everyone's living in igloos. But I was in a very different part of Alaska, but I sort of grew up still. It's kind of part of the culture, and you watch the Iditarod and you follow races. So I was really into it. I ended up moving to Montana, and I started like when I was in high school, I got a Border Collie Australian Shepherd cross. And if you know anything about a Border Collie, it needs exercise. So I started, I couldn't start a sled team. I just had one dog. And so I was like, I cross-country ski. I should just hook up this dog. And so got a harness, got gear, and I started doing that when I was in high school. And I would bike jor, and I would ski and rollerblade, and I'd do just about anything dog-powered with this dog. And I had no clue there were races, but fast forward about 20 years, that dog had passed, and they'd had some other rescue dogs, and I got a new young Border Collie. And, I took up the sport again and suddenly figured out, now we can Google things, right? So learned that there's races and there's events and there's competitions. And I saw this, in 2015, there was the Dryland World Championship in Bristol. And I was like, oh man, I've got this really fast little herding dog. So it'll be so fun. I've got to do that. And then kind of one thing leads to another, and develop a team. And now I've got 6 dogs in my kennel, and a mix of really elite sprint dogs, and then still a couple herders that just need a job really desperately to stay in shape.
Excellent. I love hearing about people's dogs and what they're running with. And dryland sports is very unique in that you can literally have just about any breed of dog and take it out on the trail. Doesn't mean you're going to win, but you can definitely take out the golden retriever or the lab or the border collie or whatever. So my first question to you, Dan, is how does these border collies fare with all of these other huskies out on the trail? You talked about being a herding breed, and as a dog trainer, I know that instinct. But how do they work well when you're running down the trail and people are passing you and coming up on you and all that?
Well, they do great. And anybody who's been at a race with, I've got a little Border Collie and a little Australian Shepherd that have anybody who's been at especially a dry land event in the Northwest in the last 4 or 5 years has seen my little herders run. And they're fast, right? They're great athletes. And if you really look at the top speed that my Border Collie can hit, especially, my Border Collie can keep up, step for step with a Gracer. We've got an elite bred Gracer in our kennel. And on just straight speed, the Border Collie can keep up. The Border Collie really lacks the mass. They're not built for having kind of their weight in the harness. But when you talk about dryland sports, just what you said, as long as I can bike fast enough, that dog can run, and that dog really flies. And I never had some of the problems that other people talk about with herders where they're turning around or, trying to nip at, other dogs. I've never had those kinds of problems. The dogs trained in the sport from when they were really young, starting out canicrossing, and I really took them through kind of a good training regimen from when they were really young. So, they're really well behaved around other dogs and in that setting, and they love to work. So, in terms of competition, my Border Collie or Australian Shepherd, if it's against, let's say, a Siberian, usually an average Siberian, usually they're quite a bit faster. If it's against an Alaskan Husky, they usually end up being kind of on par against most of kind of maybe more generic mid-distance type Alaskan Huskies. When you start adding in Pointer or Greyhound into the mix, suddenly there's so much mass on the dogs. And now they've got the same speed, these fast top-end speeds, but those dogs are so big and so strong that we can come close, but those herders can never quite keep up once you've got that mass of the kind of more Pointer-inspired mixes.
That's a great point, Dan. You're really hitting on a bunch of notes there about sort of dog physiology and sort of the makeup of dogs. And it's interesting because the breed is such a specialized breed. You talk about the Eurohounds or the really elite racing dogs. Just like with other dogs in other sports, they are either trained or bred to participate in one activity, as you mentioned with herding or in sled dog sports or protection sports or whatever. We find dogs that have those traits, and it's interesting how we can almost exploit those traits to use them in whatever activity that we're doing. So with you heading over to the championships, my next question is, are you taking one of these herding type dogs, or are you going to take your other dogs that are bred more for the sport that you're running in?
No, we're going to take two dogs that are purpose bred, and both of my dogs are out of Benjamin Thompson's lines. And Benjamin Thompson's a sprint racer, currently out of Wisconsin, used to be in southern Idaho, and he's really done a great job to take some advanced looks at taking some Ellis line and taking some lines from Europe and really trying to create a really nice, diverse sprint dog. And so we really are taking two dogs that we planned to race in this race 4 years ago. So one's 3 years old and one's 2 years old. But I was coordinating breeding and bringing them in for this exact world championship. And it's really about 4 years of planning to take a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old dog to the race. And so one is about a 65-pound dog that is very Ellis-inspired lines. And he, if you were to look at an old photo of Ellis's famous lead dog, Mike, you'd look at like kind of a little bit taller version of Mike. It's amazing how those genes have continued on dog to dog over time. He just looks so similar. And the other one is much different, a lot more English pointer, kind of a tan and white, big 72, 73-pound dog. So we're really going with two specialty dogs. And you're talking about the difference between a Border Collie and these dogs. When I first started working with my first puppy, so one of them, his name's Lars, and he's kind of my main leader, and he'll be one of the dogs coming. I take him out for a jog at 3 months old, and that dog is going straight as an arrow down the middle of a trail. from 3 months old, having worked with other dogs, these little herders, that I'm kind of teaching them to stay on trail and to go straight. This dog has gone straight down a trail, head forward, from the first day he ever stepped into a practice harness or just a practice run together. It was just amazing to me how intentional the breeding is and how kind of many traits are in that dog that are really narrow band to harness sports.
Exactly. I'm sitting here nodding my head, and I'm sure a lot of mushers that are listening are as well. That's why we do this. That's why we get the dogs that we get. And, when people talk about, the differences, especially on social media, as that, there's so much negative activity out there with, these dogs don't belong outside and all that sort of stuff. These dogs truly are bred to do what they do, whether they're doing distance and they're the fluffy, furry, husky type, or these really lean, mean racing machines that you guys run with. That's what they're bred to do, and that's what they're all about. So you had mentioned, Dan, that you'd started thinking about this race 4 years ago. So there was a lot of forethought and insight going into this. How did you know at that point that I'm sure the dogs were going to be capable of doing it, but this is also a human-powered sport, in particular the dryland events. How did you know you were going to be ready, or you were up to the challenge yourself?
Well, good question. So I've always been an athlete. I played a lot of basketball growing up. I played some college basketball. I transitioned into being a really competitive triathlete in my late 20s and early 30s. And I think kind of when you're a competitive athlete, you're sort of always, you've kind of got time limited on each sport, and you're kind of looking for the next thing. And I started really taking on training with my border collie and my little Australian Shepherd. They're named Lucky and Louie. There's a lot of L's in my kennel. So start training with these guys, and athletically, I'm not an elite cyclist. I'm a very strong cyclist. I loved when I got into the sport and I started biking and bike touring with these two guys. Then I saw a kick scooter. I had never seen one of those before. So it was 2015. I saw my first kick scooter, and I was like, "That is a fun machine." And so, I knew athletically I could compete at least with top-level athletes, and I thought if I could breed and train the right dogs, I could put together a combination. And so it became apparent to me that if I really wanted to win on a world championship level, my border collie and Australian Shepherd weren't going to win at that level. But I really felt that the right combination, that we'd have a nice shot.
Dan, on our show here on Mushing Radio, we talk a lot to distance mushers, Iditarod and Quest and whatnot. And a lot of those guys and gals are the prototypical outdoorsmen. They're fishermen and construction workers and, that sort of thing. But it sparks me to see that all of the guys that I've talked to, guys and gals that I've talked to for this series that are heading over to Sweden, are truly those elite human athletes. You had mentioned that you were a pretty good triathlete, and we have a professional mountain biker and several college runners and cross country and all of that. So you guys are definitely, pretty hardcore athletes yourself, and comparing those to a lot of the distance runners, it's just more of that sort of lifestyle, kind of rugged mentality versus just going out there and getting it on the track or in the field, as you mentioned. How do those skills relate, in particular with triathlons? How does that relate to what you're doing now with the sports in dog sports?
Well, it relates pretty well in that really what, I've done Ironman triathlons and, I've ran marathons. I've done a lot of distance sports, but I'm really competitive as a sprint triathlete. And kind of just like for dog sports, everyone thinks, when they think of dog sports, they think Iditarod, right? They think long. In triathlon, they think Ironman. But really, just like dog sports, there's sprint and there's sprint triathlon. And that's actually what I was best at. And so coming out of a basketball background, I probably have more of that kind of fast twitch muscle style where I can output a lot of power in a short amount of time and stay anaerobic in an anaerobic state for, an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. In a sprint triathlon, you're basically staying, right in between this kind of aerobic, anaerobic threshold. So that's really what you're doing in dog sports, whether you're ski joring or your one dog scooter or your one dog bike. You're basically just staying anaerobic for usually what's a pretty short race, usually about 5K. And so you've got to just stay at this super high level of output for 10 to 12 minutes at a time. Now, I will tell you, the thing I loved about the sport was working hard with the dog. Now, nothing has ever felt better as an athlete than working as hard as I could with my dog. But I had to learn after doing it for a couple of years that in training I couldn't always work as hard as I possibly could because I wanted to. I wanted to work as hard as the dogs did every single time. But to train the dogs and develop them to really pull and to really feel what it was like to be in the harness fully, I had to learn in some training runs we go fast, but in some we go slow. Sometimes we're going uphill, and I have to let them work and expand that part of their training capability in the same way myself as an athlete. Sometimes I have to climb hills, and sometimes I have to do these really challenging intervals. I had to let the dogs do the same thing. So the skill sets that I had as an athlete are really good, but I had to shift some of my mentality and how I worked with my teammates.
It's interesting that we talk about triathlons. I guess it's not going to be a secret after I say this, but recently we've been talking about doing a triathlon for dryland sports up here in Alaska, where you're doing something like a canicross, a bike jor, and a scooter event, all kind of together. Then you're doing transitions and all that. Cool. with a sprint triathlon, and it's a little slow to catch on because most people aren't that capable of doing all three things at once, in particular, just your average mushing enthusiast, the wreck musher. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that plays off. But if we could, Dan, let's switch over now to what you're doing over in Sweden. I believe you're the first person that we've had on that's doing the scooter event, and you had talked about that was your forte. Once you found out that those things existed, you were ready to rock and roll. Can you give our listeners a little bit of background about what the scooter event is and just sort of describe it for us?
Yeah, so the scooter event is basically, we call them a kick scooter. I race with a brand called a kick bike, and basically it's a cross between a mountain bike and a scooter. If you think of, maybe you see kids with like a Razor scooter where they're putting one foot on the scooter and the other foot on the ground and they're kicking it around. They take that model and you blow it up, and you've got, in my case, a 29-inch front wheel and a 26-inch back wheel, and it's very much built like a mountain bike, except there's no drivetrain. The human feet are the drivetrain. And I'll be competing in Sweden in both one-dog scooter and in two-dog scooter. And the two-dog scooter event, where there's two dogs attached to a scooter, is an amazing, fast, powerful event. And recreationally, we'll see people do scooter, at different events and races, and they sit there and let the dogs pull them around. Well, during a race at this level, you're kicking as hard as you can. You're trying to stay aerodynamic. You're keeping your shoulders down. You're trying to create these big, long, fluid, efficient strides that are driving the scooter. Not unlike what somebody would do in maybe a sprint sled race, where they're really learning how to push and kick effectively. The reason I was really drawn to the scooter was it's safer. It's really easy to get off of it. When I was on the mountain bike, if you ever crash, you're sort of attached to the wreckage. Your shoes are attached in, and you're kind of sitting on your seat, and you come down with the bike. What I love about a scooter is if there's ever a problem, I can step off of it, and I've got kind of some more options, and I really felt like it created kind of a safety thing. I also liked it because it was a new sport. It's interesting, we did some work on evaluating some of the data of top U.S. athletes and kind of the relative success in bike and scooter. And a lot of people really like biking because they bike a lot. They bike frequently. We actually found that a lot of even our top athletes performed at their best on a scooter. And my theory is the scooter takes maybe a little bit better split between dog and human. Bike is really about the person. You know, in bike tour, an elite cyclist can outrun their dog. An elite cyclist is faster than a dog. It's really just whether or not the dog can keep up with the cyclist. And in the scooter, it is hard to kick a scooter at 20 miles an hour. So you end up with a more kind of balance between how much the dog is able to impart on the vehicle compared to how much the person is.
That's a great point. And for folks that have done this with their dogs, even recreationally, you'll know that there's a big difference between that bike and that scooter experience that you talked about. And it's so much interesting. It's so interesting to be able to have that very unique timing. You talked about the kick or the pedal and being able to kick or pedal at the right time, so you're not getting the slack in the gang line and you're keeping up. So it's a fluid motion, as you mentioned. I think that takes quite a bit of experience and quite a bit of know-how to do so. So, Dan, you had mentioned that you're running in both in the 1 and the 2 dog class. I don't know if you know now when we're recording, but do you have any idea on distance for the events that you're going to be running over in Sweden?
Yeah, everything will be right around 5K, right around 3 miles. And kind of the schedule of events will include, Thursday and Friday, both of those days will be a 1-dog scooter and 1-dog bike. And then Saturday and Sunday will be the 2-dog scooter class. And it's kind of nice for us getting to compete in multiple classes because it'll kind of give us an opportunity to build some confidence and build some kind of maybe some familiarity with the trail, the conditions, adjust a little bit more to being, however much, 10 hours ahead, just dramatically different time zone. So, it'll be a nice opportunity for us to have adjusted a little bit into kind of the heats and kind of into that race event by what I consider to be our main event, which will be that 2-dog scooter.
And how fast will you go in that 3.5 miles or so?
Well, we'll be averaging at least 20 miles an hour, and probably the person who wins on that course is going to end up with an average of probably 22 to 23. And so it's kind of how much output we can maintain over that distance. Probably top speeds will max out in the low 30s for portions of that course, but it's about maintaining a very high average output over that 3 mile distance.
Wow, 30 miles an hour. Guys that are listening, can you imagine screaming down the trail going 30 miles an hour on, as Dan mentioned, something very similar to your kid's Razor scooter with just bigger wheels and more beefy brakes and handlebars? That is flying down the trail. I'm having the time of my life on a sled just going 20 miles an hour.
Yeah, it is a kick in the pants. It is really fun to be in a part of the trail where you're just flying, you're tucked down behind the dogs, and they're in rhythm and they're just flowing. And there's so many neat things to the sport. There's so many elements, and I think kind of the trust and connection that you feel with the dog is first. But I'll tell you that rush of excitement of just flying at 30 miles an hour, 6 feet back from the dogs, is an exciting feeling. It's really a rush.
And you're not just standing there. You're making decisions, split-second decisions all the time. Are you, is that line fast enough or tight enough? Do you have to make a left or a right turn? Is somebody passing you? All of this is going on while you're screaming down the trail at 30 miles an hour. What is the most fun that you have when you're out there? Is it just the rush of flying down the trail? Is it the excitement before the race? Is it, the lead up to it? Where do you find that true adrenaline for yourself?
No, I think that for me, when I really think about the sport, you know this, running dogs, there's a lot of runs that you have that have mistakes in it. Dogs are, they respond to stimuli in kind of interesting ways. And you can run 100 runs over the same trail, and even really good racers and really good trained people, you'll have these mistakes that are made, and dog responds to a squirrel running across the trail. You have to have mechanical problems. You have your own performance. But I think that the really good feeling is that end of the race, right when you finish, and you know that you put it together, the dogs put it together, the gear put it together, and you have that really good, clean run that everybody wants. And you don't get it. There's a lot of races and a lot of runs you don't get it. And when it comes together and you finish that run, and the dogs seem to feel it. They feel that excitement of having just put together a really good run. And the dogs are panting, and you're tired and exhausted, and everybody's in kind of this moment of having just put everything together and put their best out on the trail. That feeling, mushers know, people who do the sport know what that feeling's like. And I think it's like nothing else I've experienced.
I agree with you. And while it's great to win the medal or the purse or whatever, just having that feeling crossing over the finish line is worth the reason for doing it, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, you can't control who else is in a race. You don't know who else is going to be there, and you don't know what run they're going to run. This is a time trial sport. It's a sport that you're on the same track as other people, but it really depends on you just putting together the best run and the best work you can with your dogs and with your team. And you can't control the other variables. But that's great. If you finish and you felt like you did the best run that you could do, you know it, your dogs know it, and sometimes it's I've got, like Border Collie and Australian Shepherd, and on our, 2-dog scooter runs, that might be a 17 mile per hour average. But with these other guys, that might be 22 miles an hour. And either way, you just feel so good if you really know that you got the best that you could, the best that you could out of yourself, the best that you could out of your team. And it's such a process. It's a 10-minute race. We've got people flying across the world to go to Sweden to do a 10-minute race. But it's not just a 10-minute race. It's also, the years. We're talking about 4 years that ramped up to us going to this event. And, it's an amazing feeling when you finish and you kind of get to realize the results of all that work.
What an experience for sure. Dan, we have time for just 2 more questions. I always ask the same question to the mushers that are on the show, and hopefully you can provide some insight as well. That question is, if somebody came up to you and wanted to get involved with the sport, whether it be snow sports or scooter or rig or canicross or whatever, what advice would you give that person if they were seeking you out?
So, the first thing that really kind of got me involved was going to a local race. And the reason is, even if you're not going to the race, just to come and talk to people. And so many events locally. So I'm in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. We've got a local race here called the Spokane Dirt Ronde. We've got some fantastic races in the Northwest out of Cle Elum, Washington. It's something called Camp K. And during the fall and spring, there's a dryland race across the Northwest almost every weekend in spring and fall. Somebody comes and they see how it works and they talk to people, and mushers love to talk. So you will find somebody ready to explain every detail of what they're doing and why, and you get this rich learning experience, and it's a great community. And if you come and you see it and you feel it and get what it's all about, it gets you such a head start. And then you can learn what gear you need, you can learn what system, but come and talk to people and see it in person, and then you have a totally different idea than if you just researched it online.
That's great advice. Would you say that it would be best to come up and talk to you guys after the race is over? I can imagine in any of these really speed type events that you're focused on the race going in. Do you think it's best to just wait till things die down and things are a little bit slower?
I think if you're new to a race, I don't know if you're good at evaluating what the timing is that's right. If somebody comes, sometimes during a sprint race, there's maybe 10 classes that have to go off, and I might be the 8th, 9th, or 10th class, and I might just love spending some time talking to somebody in the morning for a couple of hours before my class goes off. So I don't mind if somebody approaches me before. If I'm harnessing, if you see me putting on a harness, it's a good time to give me some space. But if I've had people come and talk to me while I'm putting on a harness, and I'll say, hey, can we talk after? And so I don't think that we have to put that on the newbies. Let them come up, say hi. I'll politely ask for space if I'm just about to take off.
Excellent. All right, Dan, this is more of a comment versus a question. Do you have anybody that you would like to thank or give a shout out to as you're getting ready to head overseas to run in Sweden with the team in the World Championship?
So I always say that doing a sport like this, it's a whole family, friend, community event, and there's the top person that has to deal with having a bunch of dogs around the house and a bunch of time commitment is my wife, Tracy. So it's a family thing that takes a lot of time and a lot of commitment where you could be doing other things. And so you've got to appreciate family. And, part of my family is also going to give a shout out to Benjamin Thompson if he's listening to this, because, he's put a lot of work into breeding and being super intentional about the dogs, and people who are taking breeding seriously to breed great dogs, that means so much. It means a lot to our sport, but I also think it has a lot to do with the health of dogs in general. And so if you love dogs, good, responsible breeders that are really serious about what they're doing and how they're doing, that's meant a lot to our family. So those would be two top people to thank, and there's plenty others, but it takes a village to make this event happen.
I could not agree more, for sure. It does truly take that village, and we give a lot of kudos to our immediate families, for sure, that especially the wives and girlfriends that follow us around and follow our passions. It's just so awesome to have them on board with us, for sure. Dan, it's a pleasure having you on the show. Please hang on as we close. And on behalf of my guest today, Dan Hanks, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio. Did you know that Alaska DogWorks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska DogWorks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.